speaking, stand up and speak loud. Thank you. You want me to do the choosing?
So it's always better if I don't have to do it.
Okay. Let's start with that gentleman back there.
Okay, well,
Tell us who you are.
I'm James Mofris. It sounds to me like the average voter has to go and find out, has to use its own incentive to find out who's been contributing. Can that be published where it's much easier, like if someone like Alec starts pumping money into a candidate's election or his candidacy, can't that just be made more easily available where the average person doesn't have to ferret it out?
So I think, thank you, James, for that question. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with building the new system. I mean, I think folks are still going to have to know that it exists. They're going to have to know to go there. But what we are trying to do is make it so much more intuitive than it currently is. Right now, you have to really know the system and really know what you're looking for to find what you're looking for effectively. You might, if you have 20 minutes to waste, be able to stumble on it if you have the time, right? But to your point, we don't want to make it hard. We want to make it easy and straightforward and simple. So we are trying to build a new design that does that. And so, for example, one of the things that we are hoping with this new design is when you go to the homepage for CFIS, one of the first things that you'll see is, who are the top 10 contributors to candidates in New Mexico this year? That will just be like on the homepage, that's not even something that you have to go in and dig up, right? So we are thinking about ways to do that that are much more effective and much more intuitive. But I think at the end of the day, I mean, the other piece of the equation is working together with the media. We do work very closely with the media, and we do often get requests from them. It's not unforeseeable that we could start sending out, and I'm just spinning here, Alex, so we could talk about this more in detail. But we could do a weekly press release during campaign season about who are the top 10 contributors, or who are the top 10 independent groups doing work or something like that, so that we're proactively putting the information out there more. That's also something we can think about doing. So that's a good question.
I'd just like to thank you so much, because with all the corruption nationally, it just warms my heart to know that you're doing this work.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that's my question is, do you have conferences with other secretaries of state? And is this perhaps a national movement? Do you have information about some states that are pursuing this?
Yes, so thank you for asking that. So we do have a National Association of Secretaries of State, of which I'm a member. I'm actually the president-elect of NAS. I will be the president starting in June through the election cycle, so yes. I don't know how that happened, but I was the next victim, I guess. No, but with that being said, one thing I will tell you is that campaign finance in particular does not come up very frequently as a topic at our conferences. Part of that, I suspect, is that not every Secretary of State has authority over those matters, but I think it has more to do with the fact that election issues, just voting and election security in particular, have been such a potent topic for discussion, and quite frankly have already created, many dramas, but also many productive discussions, that there doesn't often seem to be time or interest in bringing these issues to the forefront. But even though I say that, I can tell you there are a number of my colleagues that have been trying of their own volition to bring this issue more to the forefront. I would definitely suggest you take a look at what Jenna Griswold is doing in Colorado. She's actually, and I really, they say, what is the saying about imitation is the sincerest form of flattery? She's trying to do a lot of the things that we've done here already, now that she's, Secretary of State up there. So there is certainly some movement happening. But it's just another great point. I think I need to make sure this comes up as more of a frequent topic at our NAS meetings. So thank you for that question.
Mark Friedman with Santa Fe Indivisible. You mentioned election security, and it's on all of our minds. So the question is, where do we stand with election security, and what are your priorities for the coming legislative sessions?
It's funny, I never get that question. Just kidding. So where do we stand? You know, I always say this, and if you've heard me say it before, I apologize for the repetition, but New Mexico is in a good place, and we're in a good place because we had foresight in this state long before anybody else was worrying about the Russians hacking our elections. We were worried about corrupt voting machine companies, right? And so we went to paper ballots back in 2006. So now we always have a voter-verified paper trail of every single vote that is cast in our elections that we can always go back to, and do always go back to, because we automatically recount in many situations where the races are particularly close, and we automatically post-election audit our results to make sure that those votes, as they were cast on the paper, were counted correctly by the voting machines. So that's the resilience piece of what we have in place. The other resilience piece so in other words, if we were ever to be attacked, if our voting machines were to be hacked, heaven forbid, and tampered with, we have that. And we can always, the requirement in the law is that if those votes differ, if we go back and audit and those votes differ significantly, we will freaking hand recount the whole election if we have to get the count right. And that's what I love about our audit law, and we were one of the very first states to do that, and we're pioneers on that. And I have secretaries of state from around the country always asking me how we do it here, because we do it in such an intuitive and low-tech way, which, you know, means a lot of labor. But secondly, we do have a lot of, the other piece of resiliency is now that we have same-day voter registration, like a huge weight has come off my shoulders. Because let's say again, somehow they are able to get into our voter registration system and take us all off the rolls. Well, there's the good news for you. We have same-day voter registration. You can go right in and register and vote on that day. So we have these great resiliency pieces in place. Of course, you don't want to have to go there. You want that to have to be the last resort. So we do employ a wide variety of tools and resources and are constantly checking. We're monitoring our systems. We have something called an Albert sensor that can detect unusual internet traffic patterns. We block certain IP addresses to prevent anything that's been flagged. We actually get these even sometimes daily notices from the Department of Homeland Security about these IP addresses that have been flagged for having like nefarious activity. We can block those. We have a whole team of wonderful IT folks in my office, but most importantly, we have specifically an election security officer working in our office who we are funding with a grant from the federal government. And actually that's gonna kind of go to the second part of your question. Coming up for the legislative session, you know, in terms of New Mexico, there's not a whole lot specifically that I would ask our legislature to do, but Congress needs to step up and fund election security and fund elections around the country. Because the reality is that this is modern war. Most of what's happening in terms of modern warfare is happening in the cyber world. And we are a state of the United States. We are not equipped of our own volition to have to fight back against other nation states trying to tamper with our elections. I will say the Department of Homeland Security, surprisingly, has been an amazing partner working with us. And I will say that is largely due to the career staff that work in that office and really understand and know the issues and are very dedicated. And they've been doing everything they can do. Congress needs to send money down to the states. Now, we're doing good here. We can always use more. You know what I would do is I would send more tools and resources down to the county clerks, particularly in our rural counties, many of whom don't even have IT staff at the county level. You know, they have maybe a vendor that comes in and helps them. So we're trying to bridge that gap with the resources we have currently, but more resources could really help with that. So that will be the goal moving forward.
Felon voting, felons, guys that are
So here's the thing, we actually have a good law on the books. It doesn't work the way that it is intended, and that's the piece that I'm working on now. Because our law requires that once you have fulfilled the terms of your sentence, you are automatically restored your voting rights. The problem is that we are reliant on problematic data that come to us from the corrections department. It's incomplete, it's inaccurate, sometimes it's out of date. I'm actually meeting with the Secretary of Corrections next week, who is also committed to trying to improve this process, to see what we can do about getting the data correct, number one. Number two, I supported a bill in the last session that I will be supporting in upcoming sessions that basically says, look, if you're out of jail, you get to vote. Because at the end of the day, let's say you're on parole. You could maybe make an argument for people on parole still not having their voting rights. I personally don't care for that, but you could make that argument. A lot of people have not completed the terms of their sentence because they still owe fines and fees. That is a poll tax. And I'm not okay with that. And we all know that that's one of the biggest flaws in our justice system and why so many people are not able to finally come out of the correction system is because they can't afford to pay those court-assigned fines and fees. So that's the next step that I think we're going to work on, is to just say, look, if you're out of jail, you get to vote.
When you say that when you support a bill, how much influence does that have on our legislators? And how does that work?
Good question. I think it depends. I would like to think that over 13 or so years of doing election work that I have built up a strong rapport with the legislature, and that they trust me. And I do think that the advocacy work that I've done over the years, of course, it's not all been just me. It's been always part of a team. I think the work has been effective. We've seen vast improvements and reforms. Quite frankly, even during the Martinez years, we got some good stuff done. And you know, of course, again, that's not just credit to me. That's credit to a lot of people working on these issues. But what I do is I'm in committee hearings all the time. I'm testifying to the strengths or weaknesses of legislation. My office provides an analysis for every single piece of legislation that relates to anything having to do with our office. So the legislators have before them what our office's analysis of each and every bill is. Before they make a decision. I personally lobby and converse with and discuss these issues on a one-on-one basis with legislators all the time. I serve as an expert witness on bills on the floor quite often. So I'm very actively engaged in the legislative process. That's my background. I feel, because I feel it's been effective, I continue to do it. Because why not, right? If we want to see good stuff happen. And yeah, that's it in a nutshell, I think. I don't give them any money or anything. I don't bribe them.
Right there.
Hi, I'm Pam, and I'm a counselor, and I work with mostly Medicaid clients. So a lot of my clients, and I have friends and family members who are disabled and elderly, and they vote with those absentee ballots for a lot of reasons. And I'm concerned to hear that they're being sort of targeted, and also it occurs to me that they're primarily Democratic votes. People who are less able to tend to vote that way. So I don't know what you can do about that. But I do want to also compliment you. Very seldom have I been waiting in line lately to vote. It's so easy.
Yay.
So that means a lot of those people can actually go in and vote in person, but there are a lot of people who just can't do it regardless of that. So.
Well, thank you, Pam, for bringing up that topic. So just a few things to tell you about in regard to voting with our community of people with disabilities. So first and foremost, for those of you who don't know, every single one of our polling locations across the state is ADA compliant, and I know that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone can get to them, but for the ones who can get to a polling location, they're all ADA compliant. That's required by federal law, and we also provide ADA compliant system at each and every polling place that can accommodate people who are hearing impaired, who are vision impaired, people who do not have the use of their limbs, people who use sip and puff devices. Quite frankly, there's just like a wide variety of accommodations that the technology is there for them to use to be able to personally mark their own ballot without assistance. Of course, they can ask for assistance as well at a polling location, but we do make it available for them to be able to do it without assistance. Last year, so absentee ballots in particular, to your point, so many people who have disabilities prefer to vote from home because that way they just don't have to navigate that stuff, right, if they don't feel up to it. One of the big challenges we were having was with the visually impaired community because they were not able to vote absentee from home without the assistance of a sighted person. And so we actually created an app that we put into place in 2018 that enables a visually impaired voter to go onto our website and request a ballot electronically. And then at home, using their own technology, they can mark that ballot and print it out. And we send them a fancy envelope in the mail that's embossed so they can tell by feel that it's their absentee return envelope, and they can mail it back all on their own without any assistance from anybody. So we feel really good about that. Yeah, that was a great, exciting development. But despite all of these great things, it takes a lot of forethought. So I am working together with a new group that's coming up, and these are just concerned citizens, people who are interested in, as they say, getting out the disabled vote, and they're putting together, we are putting together sort of, I think it's called, I forget exactly what it's called, Rev Up or something like this. Anyway, it's a get out the vote effort for folks in the disability community to let them know, about upcoming elections, where they get information about how, where, and when to cast a ballot, about the ADA options available, about how to vote absentee. By the way, another new development that we passed in this last legislative session is that the state now pays for every returned absentee ballot. Do you remember in the past, people used to have to figure out, well, how much postage is this, and did I put enough stamps on this, and blah, 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 blah. No, don't have to do that anymore. We're just paying for it now. So that's another thing for people who don't want to have to, pay another poll tax to put stamps on a ballot. They could just mail it back for free. So we're trying, we put this group together. We just started putting this group together to look into how do we better get this information out there to the disability community and help them understand what the options are. We have so many options available, and it really is just up to the individual voter. Do they prefer to go to a polling place? Do they prefer to vote from home? Do they prefer to have assistance or not? But we want to make sure that they know what all of those options are. So I appreciate you raising that point because it is really important. And you're right, we don't have as robust participation amongst folks in the disability community as we could. If that information were out there better. So that is a piece of the work that we have to do.
And it could be easier to get the absentee. There's a whole process where you have to go get one by mail, and then it gets sent to you, and then you have to, if you're going to do it by mail, it takes time. And
Sure. They need to know. Yeah, they need to know. You got to plan ahead. Plan ahead, right? Yeah. Thank you for that. Mm-hmm.
Greg Cornyn, it's outside your purview, but what's your personal opinion on the importance of net neutrality for fair elections?
I'm always willing to offer my personal opinion on things. Obviously, I favor net neutrality. I think that the work, so to speak, that's being done to commoditize the internet is troubling. I don't know yet what the impact could be on our elections, but I think one of the big problems with eliminating net neutrality is that we still don't fully understand what that even looks like in other sectors, right? So I think it's something that I am personally concerned about. I am concerned about it from the point of view of an election administrator as well. It's probably something we need to start thinking about more collectively as a group. I have my list. Of things to bring up to my colleagues, so thank you for asking that.
I just, again, it's argument that national elections are not for us, right? And it's a hard argument to deal with, when you're there and, and I'm just wondering, what is the state doing to try to overcome this argument?
I'm so glad you asked that question. So in the fall of 2017, I formed something called the Native American Voting Task Force. We have representatives appointed from the Pueblos, from Navajo Nation, and from each of the Apache tribes. We meet with them on a bi-monthly basis, and their whole purpose is to help with the problem that you've just identified, which is that we have a discrepancy between participation in our rural Native communities and the rest of the state. And on average, it's around 6% lower turnout. And so what we know from that, right, is that people aren't participating, the voices aren't being heard, they're not, as a result, not adequately being represented, right? So this task force has come together with two main agendas. The first is to help advise my office about how we can better meet our responsibilities to our Native communities. And so they're advising my office on those policies. They've also decided of their own volition to take it upon themselves and do programmatic work and go out into communities and start putting educational activities together, doing voter registration efforts, creating dialogue and discussion and forums within the communities. It is really hard. It doesn't matter what community you're in, but if you're in a community where voting is not the norm or the tradition, for whatever reason, to overcome that. Voting behavior is deeply psychological behavior, and we have all sorts of motivations for or against it built into not only how we were raised, but our DNA, just like everything else, right? And so one of the things we're in the process right now is trying to even just identify where are those hurdles and what sort of messaging that can we use to try to be effective, and who are the appropriate messengers. I mean, I don't try to be the messenger in Native communities because I'm not Native. So how do we bring more Native folks into the fold who are part of those communities, who feel like they have more of a beat on the cultural issues, obviously using language appropriate approaches, etc. So that's the work we're doing. It's long-term work. We're not going to close this gap overnight. We know that. But I'm committed to the process long-term. These folks are committed to the process long-term. So we're gonna keep it up, keep doing this stuff. But it's hard, and we could also use more money for that, which I am asking the legislature for this year. So thank you.
My name is Tom DiRuggiero, a member of Indivisible Santa Fe, and I'm a voter registrar. Quick question regarding whether or not a person is still eligible to vote. What is your policy on purging the voter registration lists? People said, some have approached me saying I haven't voted in years, or I didn't vote last time, but anyway, just want to know what the status is as far as that. I know it's a nasty subject in other states, but
right.
What policy is here.
So I'm glad you asked that question. I apologize for going over. Okay. So we have both, in terms of that process, we are guided by two things and two things only: federal law and state law. So the federal law does require what they call a list maintenance process, and they do require removal of voters for certain criteria. And what our state process does is, what our state statutes do is it takes the federal requirement and puts it into policy for the state. What it is whether or not you remain on the voting rolls has almost nothing to do with whether or not you vote. What it has to do with is whether or not you're living where you're registered to vote and getting mail there. So the way it works is you're registered at 123 Apple Street. You move away from 123 Apple Street, you forwarded your mail to your new address, and you haven't bothered to update your voter registration yet. What will happen is, in the summer before a general election, we will pull down the list of all of the national change of address folks that are in the USPS database, and we will send them a card. It's called a confirmation card that just says, hey, it looks like you've moved, and also, you're not registered to vote at your new address. Would you just let us know if you want to stay on the voter rolls? You can send this card back to us. You can go online and register to vote at your new address. You can go ahead and go vote in the next election, or really any time in the next 2-year period. You can do any of those things and you can stay registered to vote. And so for the most part, people respond to those either by sending the card back or going online and updating their registration or voting. Now, some people have moved, and they have not only moved, they have moved. They're not getting the card, they're not seeing anything, and if they don't respond to the card, don't at any point update their voter registration in that 2-year period, and do not vote. It has to be all 3 of those things. Then they are in the queue for removal, because what that indicates to us is they moved and they gone, right? And most of the time that is the case. They've moved, they're gone, they don't want to be on the rolls anymore, what have you. What happens then is so you'll go 2 general elections down the road. The following winter, that list will be pulled of all of those people who were sent that card 2 years prior, but didn't vote, didn't re-register, didn't do any of that stuff. And now we make it super easy at motor vehicle too. Like, they didn't update their address at motor vehicle. Like, they didn't do anything. And those will be the names that are provided to the county clerks. The county clerks in every county in the state form what's called the Board of Registration. Those boards review all of the names on that list. They make sure that they were put on there pursuant to federal and state law, that nobody got on there that shouldn't be on there. And in some cases, particularly in the smaller counties, they'll actually do a phone tree and reach out to folks and say, hey, you're on this list, you want to stay registered or not. Then and only then, after that board has done its work and reviewed and everything, and they're bipartisan boards, can those names be taken off the list. So it's a really rigorous process. And obviously by the time you get down between when we first send out those confirmation cards and that list we come down to, it's whittled down to very little. I hope that makes sense. It's a really complicated process. But we do it that way so that we're complying with federal law, but we don't take people off the list who, without some sort of oversight, yeah.
We don't abuse our guests, so how about a couple more questions?
Sure.
Because
Yeah.
I have others.
Okay.
So, does the secretary, your association of SOS, do they have a budget, and could they put out a national PSI, sort of, on the networks, sort of making people aware that they should look in, keep up with this, and remind them that, if they move, they should check to make sure that they're back on the rolls or re-registered in a new address?
That is a great suggestion. We do have a budget. The budget is primarily operational, just to do the stuff that we do in terms of coming together and things like that. But with that being said, it's not unheard of for us to do the kind of thing you're suggesting. In fact, the current president, who's the Secretary of State in Iowa, and I just put out an op-ed that ran in what did it run in USA Today? Roll call. Okay, well, not everyone reads roll call. But we put it out just talking about, going to trusted sources for election information, not clicking on every post you see and things like that. But that's a great idea. And I have my list. I have my list of 3 things now that I'm going to bring up at the next meeting. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll ask you a couple of questions. One for Indivisible Santa Fe, and other groups also, like League of Women Voters, are very active in registration, getting people registered.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks to but in this discussion, you made me aware of other kind of more pointed issues. We talked about the difficulty of the disabled, the problem with the Native American voting. Is there a way for these dedicated organizations like that to somehow work more coordinated with your office, people in your office or the task force or whatever, to
Yes, and I would say to at least a certain degree that is currently happening. I definitely have a good relationship with the league, work with them very closely. In fact, in 2018, the task force and my office and the league worked to put out a special Native American voting guide just for those communities, those Native communities around the state, and it's something that we're looking to are doing for the 2020 election as well. Now, not so much specifically with Indivisible, although if you guys want to get on board with me for this thing that I'm doing, let's make that happen. Because often what happens is I have different communities, different groups, different organizations that are trying to do voter registration drives. Sometimes it's in tribal communities. Sometimes it's just in places like, let's say, Chaparral, New Mexico, which is a colonia that just, doesn't have a lot of, activist folks that live around there, right? It's mostly just working people who get up every day and go to their jobs. And they need help. They need bodies to help come register folks to vote. And, these are not the kind of communities where folks are just going to, of their own volition, go online and register to vote, if they even have internet, right? So what I've been doing when these requests come to me is I've been connecting folks, particularly with, many of you may know Suzanne Prescott. She heads up, I forget what she calls her organization, New Mexico Voter Registration Group or something like that. It's not an official organization. It's just a group of voter registrars that come together and work together to do as much voter registration activity in the community as they can. And so that's one group that I have been bringing on board to come help support some of these other efforts. But I would gladly do that with any of the Indivisible groups that want to do that as well. Just have you on my list of folks to connect, and that's what we do.
Great. One more quick question. You already talked about public campaign finance. I found that some conservative people are just, their hackles go up when I hear that because they think it's a government takeover.
Right.
And everything.
Right.
And so how to deal with that, but also, you expressed very well what a problem it is. And when we talk about getting money out of politics, we're not talking about getting all money out of politics because it takes money to run for office.
Sure.
So the question I have is, how do you relate the public campaign finance as a solution to this problem? One little anecdote, Lawrence Lessig, who's a Harvard law professor, who's one of the big academics that is behind the campaign finance reform movement. He has a little anecdote in one of his videos, which I think is very good. He says, when he's driving in the car with his wife and his kids in the back seat, he said, and you probably heard this. Anyway, he says, I'm the type of guy that says, stop that. But my wife, she's a lot smarter than I am, so she says, well, why don't you do this? Or here, take this coloring book, or why don't you take the video and so forth. Because when, you can't just tell these people that are relying on this system, they need this money. We can't just tell them stop taking it. We got to give them something, something that will help them, get the job done, but in an alternative way. So anyway, what can you offer about that?
I mean, that's the $1 million question, literally. And to be frank, at this point, I don't know what the answer is except, so I think two things. I think first and foremost, I think you're a person who inherently understands the value of public financing of campaigns and what that gets us as a society and our democracy or not. And I think the same kind of person that understands and values the concept of public financing of campaigns is also the same kind of person who understands and values why do we even pay taxes in the first place, right? If you are a person who is against paying taxes and having your money go to anything, except for the things that you personally utilize, right? Then, you know, so I think that's a problem with these conflicting value systems we have in this country to begin with. But I think that most people can understand the concept of a level playing field. Most people can understand the conflict of, or the concept of fairness. I think we can get so far on that topic. To be really frank, what we need more than anything else is to overturn Citizens United. There is not any one thing we can do that will have a bigger impact on this problem than Citizens United. And I often tell people, and some of you may know, I occasionally teach political science at the University of New Mexico, and I always love the part where we get to campaign finance, because Buckley versus Vallejo, which was the Supreme Court decision that came up with this notion that money equals free speech, was decided in 1976, which is the year that I was born. So I've never lived in a world where money did not equal speech. And I'll be damned if I'm gonna die in a world where money equals speech. So we gotta fix it.